Persoalan besar yang kita ingin lihat di World Economic Forum 2026 adalah bagaimana perpecahan di peringkat antarabangsa mampu disatukan suaranya dalam bentuk dialog di peringkat diskusi di World Economic Forum di sini, dan bagaimana kehadiran Presiden Donald Trump dan juga pimpinan negara yang lain yang paling ramai kehadirannya untuk tahun ini akan mampu mewujudkan satu bentuk dialog yang membawa kepada tindakan seterusnya, termasuk juga dari sektor korporat dan juga perniagaan sendiri, dan paling penting bagaimana ia akhirnya akan mencerminkan dan juga diterjemahkan kepada keputusan dalam korporat pelaburan khususnya untuk melihat kepada kestabilan pasaran dan juga dasar yang kita mahukan di peringkat antarabangsa. Dan untuk itu sesi pada kali ini kita berbesar hati kita bersama dengan Dato' Sri Amirul Faizal Wan Zahir, merupakan Managing Director of Khazanah National Berhad. Dato', thank you so much for joining us. Once again, we met in Davos. There's a lot of discussion previously about building up trust and all that. It seems like we don't have that trust yet. And a lot of fragmentation is happening currently. First of all, what do you make of this year's theme, spirit of dialogue? What do you feel of the theme, and how crucial and important it is to have that dialogue currently? Because we have dialogues from so many platforms before, and yet we still have distrust for institutions globally.
Yeah. Well, mula-mula, I think kalau nak tengok kan, keadaan sekarang, the main big shift that's happening today is disruption.
Yeah.
So some people call it the era of global disruption.
Right.
But actually it's not really global disruption. I would say it's more global reconfiguration. So the distrust really comes from the fact that you have one party, in the case of the Trump administration, voicing out their view, how they would like to do it going forward, and how it's been implemented is because there's lack of dialogue, there's lack of information. So I think it's quite apt that we have here in Davos, where people think about understanding each other and trying to rewire or reconfigure the global era going forward. And what I mean by that is global trade, financial markets, looking at innovation, looking at geopolitics, a lot of things I think requires that dialogue for people to get real understanding before they act. Yeah.
Do you think that a lot of parties understand, because you mentioned about reconfiguration, this is not an easy task to do, especially for corporate sectors, because they need clearer policies nationally and internationally, and this seems very it's quite a challenge for them. But do you think that they understand the reality of it and how to reconfigure it based on the reality of the situation?
To be honest with you, this is still evolving, so I don't think anyone really has an answer. But there are current momentum or directions that is being set today, right? The course which is being set. So let's take, and of course this all started with the Trump presidency. Now, in the last couple of decades, you had global trade, meaning to say that because of comparative advantage, people felt that they could manufacture and have supply chains linking everywhere. Now, the US made it clear they want to look after the middle class, and they want to reindustrialize and reshore manufacturing. And then at the same time, when trying to do that, they're using tariffs, where people have to see how they can reconfigure the supply chain. And that is a momentum which is really, really moving forward. Another thing which is a big momentum change is the Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine. And here, this is back in the 1820s, etc., where the US has said, Western Hemisphere, this is for the US, and therefore Europeans, please take care of your own, and then the rest. Now, meaning to say there's less overreach on their part, but compared to where we were before. So something like that would mean another momentum, which is basically looking at markets where, whether it's Asian markets, European markets, would have to look at new markets to go in. And of course that has an impact on China. When China, however, has been the exporter and manufacturer for the world, and they will then have to find new places to find the manufacturing. Now, they're exporting excess capacity. And that's another thing which is impacting, right? So all these momentum is coming in, and where the uncertainty comes in really comes from, how is this going to pan out? What's China going to do? What's Europe going to do? What's Southeast Asia going to do? All these policy changes has an impact on financial markets and all trade.
we look at the Asia, for instance, because Asia is where major powers basically increasingly compete. For Malaysia, for instance, do you think that staying strategically neutral still an advantage for Malaysia and for the region as well? Given that global is forcing, or we don't, it's a thin line for global South countries, especially from Southeast Asia, to maneuver the whole situation, the fragmentation. Do you think that being neutral is an option, right?
Well, I don't think so. I think being neutral is a vulnerability. I mean, you are vulnerable. And when you look at ASEAN, it's been concept of neutrality, and I think being neutral here, sitting out, meaning neutral means sitting out from this change, is being vulnerable. I think you can't sit out. I think what you have to do is build relationships, proactively build relationships with China, with the US, with Europe, the global South, and everyone. Some people call it strategic ambiguity, and some people criticize that of being indecisive. Actually, it's not. In this day and age, all countries, in coming up and reconfiguring trade supplies and relationships, you have to go out there. But as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, now there's a couple of things, right? Of course, US talks about the foreign policy and how it has suited their national interests. Now, one national interest for the US is making sure that the trade lanes in Southeast Asia remains open.
Right.
Meaning to say that Southeast Asia remains relevant from a trade perspective, and there's no dominant force, which means that we're taking this unique position that Southeast Asia has and Malaysia has, and trying to build those relationships, for trade, for financing, for innovation, and I think that's the thing. I mean, so I wouldn't say neutrality means sitting out. I don't think we can afford that.
I had this discussion this morning. It's very interesting because one of the things that they are looking at is how US foreign policies has changed multilateralism, but at the same time it create a vacuum for mini multilateralism for certain regional that. But do you think that mini multilateralism is crucial and important given that current fragmentation is happening around the world?
Yes. First, sovereignty. This is the US, of course. Sovereignty is more important than multilateralism.
Right.
Now, let's take trade. Okay. So now that you have Chinese exports no longer being exported to the US, it needs to find a home. And so far, looking at trade numbers, China has been exporting to Europe, to other markets in the global South as well. Now, think of it. If you actually export excess capacity to these countries, then if you're adopting a multilateral approach, then we just accept that, right? But when you actually want to look at a sovereign, look at your self-interest, and you are a country that has an industrial complex, do you want to protect your industrial complex against cheap goods? Obviously, you want to do that, or there's that balance. So I think more and more when these things starting to reconfigure, just because one major country has looked at sovereignty above multilateralism, the rest of the world will have to think the same. Now, some countries are larger, so you have China, and perhaps you have some European bloc, they can do it in that manner, but in Southeast Asia, we're all small countries. And I think we need that platform, that multilateral mini platform, in order to really look at how we're going to benefit from this reconfiguration as opposed to being negatively impacted.
But how does the reconfiguration change the way Khazanah looks at investments and also country exposure in terms of choosing your strategic investments?
Okay, thanks for that. And I think this is quite important because when we look at investments, what I just talked about, reconfiguration, right? It's undoing something which has happened over decades.
Right.
So even, at least my view is this will pan out even beyond the Trump administration, but it's long term.
Right.
Now within this long term, we have to look at what we do in terms of financing. Now, there's financial markets, which tend to be more quick, and then there's also longer-term investments. Now, for the short term, in terms of financial markets, we do this by taking exposure, following the geographic, basically looking at the growth of all the multi-countries and trying to balance that approach, diversifying that.
Right.
But from a longer-term perspective, we being the Sovereign Wealth Fund, with 60% of our investment in Malaysia, we're looking at strategic investments that make sense for Malaysia and how it handles this reconfiguration, right? So I'll mention that. So first of all, as a result of this, countries, not just Malaysia, even the US, even European, will have to look at the industrial policies. And Europe, they're looking at infrastructure, they're looking at even defense. You've got US, of course, looking at their ecosystem in terms of their reshoring. And I think this is one theme that we can look at. Another theme that we can look at is AI, right? Now, the infrastructure or the AI is something that will happen. And we've got a lot of AI infrastructure in the form of, energy that can actually fuel data centers. We've got a semiconductor ecosystem. That's another theme that we need to look at. And us, so that's what we're doing. We have done our impact, looking at semiconductors, looking at mid-tier companies. The infrastructure, we've got energy, so we're looking at energy transition. We want to be a hub, so therefore we look at aviation connectivity and digital as well. That helps with the AI infrastructure. So our so-called longer-term investments is directly relevant to ensure that Malaysia doesn't lose out and actually gains from this reconfiguration.
Of course, Malaysia has a strong base when it comes to semiconductors and advanced manufacturing. And what needs to change or improve further for us to move, from just participation into leadership in that sense?
Well, I think we have to take stock of this whole ecosystem. And we can't be a leader in every single aspect, right? If I break down AI and break it down into the infrastructure layer, and maybe we call it the platform layer, and then the application, let me explain that to you. Yes. Infrastructure is the foundation. So basically you need your chips, you need your data centers for compute, you need your energy, and that's something which and of course you need the fiber to connectivity as well. So that's something which is like the basic infrastructure. Platform tends to be more of your LLMs, your coding, your R&D, and then of course you have your application, which could be software as well as the hardware. Now, we already have certain strengths. We're already part of the semiconductor supply chain. So, we should really think about, rather than being a manufacturer of a part, but being a solution provider in, say, advanced packaging as the industry evolves. It's a bit like TSMC, where they just fabricate, but that's actually giving more solutions in relation to that in terms of leading or even equipment, right? So there's a space that we can do by providing innovation and solutioning in this space. Hence, leadership is not necessarily leadership in everything, but in the spaces that we are strong at. And I think in the area where a lot of people have not paid attention in is application. And why I say that is because, we're in the equatorial belt. We have a tropical weather, we've got rain, we've got different forests, we've got agriculture. Now, who's going to innovate for us? We can't expect somebody living in the snow, etc., to innovate for us. We have ourselves. So this is something that we can actually come and play a role and innovate in the application, whether it's a software or the hardware in relating to agri-technology or climate change resilience. There's many things that we can do here.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Khazanah somehow, because what does basically Khazanah, how does basically Khazanah balance national priorities? This is a very important mandate for you guys, and with commercial discipline, especially when managing long-term risk like energy transition and also at the same time private capital influence.
Right. Well, first of all, I know the easy way out is to call national interest or developmental as a donation or charity. It's not. Across the world, whenever a country develops, it cannot be financed by taxes or government money. It needs other people's money, so to speak. It needs the private sector.
Right.
It needs capital, whether it's capital markets, etc. And once you touch capital, say IPO or fixed income investments, right? Once you touch that, you have to be commercial. So likewise, when you look at the issues that we have, while we're doing something for the development of the nation, whether it's energy transition, whether it's connectivity, whether it's digital, now in order to do that, we're actually using it together. We're crowding in capital from outside. And for that to happen, you do need commercial returns. So I think where we are slightly different here is because we are the Sovereign Wealth Fund, our thinking is more for the benefit of advancing the country, advancing Malaysia. That's why we choose where we want to choose. But it has to be commercial because otherwise money, a private capital will not come in to support that growth.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember my conversation with PNB recently during their announcement of the dividend. They were talking about the lost decade of our capital market. Now, your point of view for the last decade for our countries, basically, what would be the success story do you see rather than the major missed opportunity that we had for the last 10 years at least?
Well, the last 10 years, we see a stagnation in the value creation of our markets, whether the capital markets, and there's really no new innovation coming in. In fact, when you actually look at our stock market, look at the companies that are listed, right, in the last 10 years, and then where they are now, it's about the same. And it's all about providing dividends and it's just creaming or milking whatever that we have. Now, if I were to look last 10 years in the US, and look at the companies last 10 years and the companies today, it's very different.
Yeah.
We have a lot of growth and innovation coming in. And you have the Mag 7 today, which not all of it was there that 10 years ago. So that shows a difference, right? So I guess when you look at the 10 years that we have, that has to change. We can't have the same companies, same profile, and no innovation going forward. I think what we do need is a very active effort from shareholders as well as from companies is to innovate. We have to demand more on returns, just like in Japan, where they're demanding a certain ROE and demanding certain value creation plans. We, as our shareholders, should demand the same thing from our companies. And then at the same time, and this is what I think maybe last decades, maybe like last few decades, is why aren't we competing at the same level as Korea? Why aren't we competing at the same level as Taiwan, for example? China at one time were actually behind us in terms of that. So I think there's a lot more that we can do in the next 10 years, 15 years, and so on, where we can actually move up the value chain and be at that level.
But in terms of the measurement of success to the country, because we often refer to GDP, for instance, but to you, what measures do you foresee that, or do you see that it's important for us to look at, or the new measures at least?
Well, taking that example, if I say that in the future I'd like to see ourselves on par with the likes of Korea, etc., then I would say a measure is economic complexity. I mean, there's such a thing as an economic complexity index where they look at the exports and they look at the network of product and services domestically, right? Where it has to be about innovation. That actually shows sustainability in terms of how we're going to, the type of manufacturing, the type of talent pool, the type of innovation going forward. And we have to be competitive in what we export as a value add, because otherwise you won't be able to export. And I think when we do that, then inshallah we can actually grow up, be more of a stronger nation going forward.
The distrust towards institutions have been talked a lot for the past few years, at least at World Economic Forum. Do you see that it has changed, it has improved over the years, especially in our region and Malaysia as well?
In Malaysia, yes. I say Malaysia, yes. There's one thing that is scarce in this environment, is stability. right? It's quite scarce. And, everyone, so in fact, investors are not just looking at growth, they're actually looking at predictability and stability. And I think when you look at Malaysia, for example, where you see GDP growing, you see even the ringgit is strengthening, so all things are going, and institutions are actually being a bit more resilient. You see strong execution and you see stability. And with that, and that consistent execution and stability in how we perform, builds that trust. So I think there's more of that happening, I think, in our part of the world.
I know Khazanah has your forum, Mega Trends. Working Forum also has their prediction and the global risk report and barometer and all that. But your personal trends, expectations, at least for the next 5 years?
Well, I guess it depends on which region, right?
Yes.
I am, I wouldn't say bullish. I am, well, in a way, because we are Malaysia, we've got 60% Malaysia.
Yeah.
I do believe that Asia, and I think in Malaysia in particular, has a good prospect going forward. But having said that, we only have ourselves to blame if we don't achieve that. And why we say that is I come back to this consistency of policy, consistency of execution, and that stability and building these partnerships. If we get it right, I think we have a good thing going. Of course, if we don't get it right, then it can go south.
The crucial and most important factors, one of it is political stability.
Right.
In 1 year and a half from now, I think we're going to have the next general election, right? By law. How do you see the situation? Because we can predict that you're going to have a general election. You can read the whole political scenario in Malaysia. But how do you see that would this be one of the key downside risk for our growth?
Well, I think when you think about it going forward, and I'm not going to talk about politics or talk about elections, right? And we take the story of Indonesia when they had a change in government for the first time. I mean, it's like 10, 15 years since then. And we're just, we were in 2018, so we're about 70. So I think when you actually look at these things, what is important, like I said, there's what is scarce today is that stability and predictability. And when you have things going, there's actually a premium attached to doing something like that.
Right.
And regardless of what happens, I think it's important to have that stability in policy, in execution of all the institutions. That's quite important for us to, not just within the country, but externally to benefit.
All right, Datuk, thank you so much for joining us at World Economic Forum, and this is very crucial, important discussion. Itu adalah bagaimana untuk kita melihat bergerak ke hadapan, bukan saja di Malaysia, tapi juga di peringkat antarabangsa, dan juga bagaimana kita melihat segala apa yang berlaku pada akhirnya yang dibincangkan di World Economic Forum adalah sangat berkait rapat dengan apa yang kita cuba laksanakan di peringkat tempatan sebagai contoh. Kerana ini membentuk dasar pada akhirnya kefahaman kita terhadap apa masalah dunia, apa masalah serantau kita, dan perniagaan juga harus faham ini realiti sebenar sebelum mereka membuat sebarang keputusan strategik mereka, sama ada dalam bentuk pelaburan, pengembangan syarikat mereka, operasi mereka dan sebagainya. Ini juga yang dibincangkan di World Economic Forum. Dari masa ke masa semua ini akan dibincangkan dan juga dibawakan oleh kami Astro AWANI di semua platform kami. Okey, sekian saja untuk jam ini. Banyak lagi perkembangan yang kita akan bawakan dalam program yang seterusnya.